Hi, I'm Kara Barlow. I'm the director of the Derry Public Library, and I'm happy to welcome today the Merrimack Analysis Group. We have Greg Page and Ed Beatty here to talk to us about sexting and other hazards, online safety for families. And I'll hand it over to you, gentlemen.
Okay, thanks very much, and thanks everybody for coming out today. I know it's one of those sort of strange melting / freezing, thawing kind of times, but thank you for braving the conditions. And as you all know, we're going to talk about online safety for families. So we're going to sort of run the gamut here, going in talking about some of the trouble that teens get into online, and then to let you parents know ways you can monitor kids and sort of keep tabs on that a little better. Before we jump right in, we'll say just a little bit about who we are and how we got started doing this, because we always tend to get that question. We'll sort of preempt it here. And actually, the story goes back to Afghanistan in 2011. So Todd, who's actually not here with us today, but who's his beautiful pictures there in the bottom right of the slide, he and I were deployed with the Massachusetts Army National Guard, and we had a lot of trouble with soldiers and social media. So to give you an example, we had a soldier post on a Facebook wall of someone back home, "Hey, can't wait to see you in Reading on February 12th. Well, we don't want just anyone to know when the unit is coming and going from theater. That's actually the most vulnerable time in the rotation. And these kind of things were always done with innocent intent, but potentially bad consequences. Just one other quick example is someone's taking a picture from the inside of a base, showing the perspective of a person looking outside through the entry control point, and sending that picture over Twitter, thinking it was only visible to the recipient. And really, for all intents and purposes, it probably was, but anyone who'd known where to look could have actually found that picture based on the way it was sent. So what Todd and I learned is that people all over the place in every other context are getting into trouble because of things they're doing online, and often because they just don't know the consequences. So we formed this group, we picked up a brilliant engineer along the way, that's Ed, and we go around, we kind of say we're like DARE, but for online identity. So we go to places like this, we go to libraries, senior centers, schools, universities, hospitals, banks, you name it, we've been there, and we do these types of programs. The disclaimer here is that we're only going to run the program today for about an hour, hour plus. I know we got limits from the Derry TV people there as well, so we will not cover the entire world. We can't boil the ocean in an hour. So for everything we do mention, I'd say there'll probably be about 10 things we don't, and that's just sort of the nature of the beast. But I know after the camera portion is wrapped up, Ed and I will stick around to handle any of your questions. Okay, before we jump into some of the downsides, we want to talk about what we'll call the upside of connectedness. And we want to sort of keep this sense of balance throughout the program. We don't want you to come away thinking that we're implying or we're saying that the internet is somehow bad. In fact, the internet is in many ways wonderful, and it's an absolutely wonderful resource for finding information and for connecting people. We can see that, for instance, we can get information with no delay. Things like traffic patterns, things we couldn't have necessarily known before, and they make our lives wonderful and more efficient in many ways. Sometimes the information we get online is not accurate, and I think many of you remember the days after the Boston Marathon bombing, some of the pictures we saw on sites like Reddit, where people tried to crowdsource the whodunit and really took things in a wrong direction. But sometimes that crowdsourcing can be really wonderful, and an example that Ed and I just noticed was Nature magazine having scientists compare the accuracy of Wikipedia articles and Encyclopedia Britannica articles. And amazingly, these researchers found that the rates of errors were about the same in each of the two. So there's a lot of wonderful aspects to crowdsourcing for sure. First aid, we just saw a story, the story is actually a little bit dated, but we just caught this tale of someone who was an aid worker in Haiti who actually was able to apply life-saving first aid to himself after an earthquake because of an app on his iPhone that gave him the instructions. So that's pretty wonderful. And we will say something else about youth specifically here. We have this youth activism bullet point. If you look at political participation among young people in four-year presidential election cycles, that's pretty much been on a steady decline since World War II. It's just gone down, 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 down. But something changed in 2008. And then in 2012, that change continued in a good direction. In 2008, youth participation actually went up. And then we saw even higher participation in 2012. And maybe some of that has to do with the candidates, but we think actually a lot of that has to do with the internet. Because people are connecting with peers, they're finding out about causes, they're becoming aware of things in a new way, and it's definitely impacting them. So we want to even say that there's been a big movement lately to classify the internet as being a fundamental right. When we say fundamental right, we're talking like on the level of other UN recognized fundamental rights like shelter and good education and clean water. So the idea is that the internet is so fundamental that all people probably should have access to it. And of course we found that people in areas with poor internet connectivity were much more likely to say it. Perhaps people in North America and Europe already take this for granted. And so in a UN poll, they were not as likely to say this must be a fundamental right. And then as far as how this is going and how the internet's being brought all over the world, really the sky's the limit. And one of the things we just noticed, we saw a nice article in the MIT Tech Review about Google's Project Loon, a way that they're actually using balloons to bring internet connectivity to all kinds of people that currently don't have it. A cynic might say that Google can then sell them, sell more advertising because they've got more eyeballs looking at those search results. But that's where things are headed. We want to just also say, like, the key here is keeping a sense of balance. It's encouraging internet use and certainly encouraging students to use the internet, but just always being aware of some of the downsides as well as the upsides. And I know that a lot of people have heard this message. So a lot of you probably are here thinking, okay, what are we going to tell you that you haven't heard? We get it. So sexting is bad, right? So kids shouldn't be taking naked pictures or semi-naked pictures of themselves and posting them and sending them around. And while, yes, of course we will say that, hopefully we'll put a little more nuance to it, but we also know that there is some value in the messaging of sort of hearing some of these points again, and even hearing some of the cautionary tales and some of the horror stories that we'll share with you. And a parallel we'll give has to do actually with drunk driving education. So drunk driving education didn't begin in a big way in American schools until the middle 1980s. And what happens is, if you look at this trend, I know some of you folks in the back probably see this as like an eye chart, but what you're seeing here is from 1991 to 2012, it's the rate of drunk driving fatalities among Americans under age 21. And so what I think anyone can take away, if you look at sort of the general trend here, is that it's decreased. And we would say a lot of this has to do with the messaging, of reminding people that this is not an okay social behavior. There's been a stigma attached to it because of all that messaging. And the message is reached so young and so early in kids' lives that it impacts them when they're able to get behind the wheel of a car. And we think that a similar type of effort needs to be made with online safety. So it's, even though kids, yeah, they've heard maybe they shouldn't be doing certain activities online or taking certain risks, the more they hear that, the more it can actually impact them. Some of the problems that kids get into, it's probably not going to shock anyone that a lot of trouble from the online world spills into the offline world. And the McAfee TIB, or the Teen Internet Behavior Study, is where you're seeing the statistics cited. That's the source of the statistics cited here. Certainly, arguments that happen online can impact kids' friendships and even sometimes their own physical safety. They can certainly spill over in a pretty negative way. And I think one of the things we want to remind everyone is that the part of the brain that controls impulses is still developing in adolescence. And that's actually why we have a separate legal system for juveniles. We don't hold them to the same standard because we know they can't make decisions the same way. Think of this, officially, we don't let anyone in the US drink until they're 21 years old. We don't let anyone drive until they're 16 or 17, depending on the state. But in most cases, we let kids sort of run free on the internet and learn all this for themselves. And our point would be that we're sometimes setting kids up for failure when we just sort of turn them loose and don't either keep tabs on them or help educate them about what this can all mean. In the same study, we found something amazing. We found that nearly a quarter of the parents who were asked about their children's online behavior said that they just didn't monitor it at all because they couldn't handle the technology. It was just way too much, it was way too advanced, they didn't bother. We want to push against that. And we'll talk more about that later on in the presentation, about why we think that's dangerous and why we think it's bad for parents to buy into the idea that only kids can understand tech. We want to also say that the best thing we've ever seen, and as maybe if it sounds a little hokey or it doesn't sound like very scientific, we're going to say it anyway because we've heard and seen this time and time again. The best thing is open dialogue. So just initiating the discussion can go quite a long way. And what we've seen work really, really well with parents and kids and online behavior is a contract. So we recommend to any parent, especially for a parent whose kids are just getting into the age where they're starting to surf the internet a little bit more on their own, is to have them and their child sit down together, and especially when they can get the child to actually dictate the terms of the contract, what you'll find is the result will be the same as if you made the rules, but you'll have a different level of buy-in from your child. Because the kid already knows what he or she shouldn't be doing online, and when they can say, yeah, I'm going to agree not to do these certain things, and if I break the terms of this, I'm going to lose my privilege to access technology at home, that tends to be remarkably effective. So that's a huge recommendation we'd make to any parent, is to find a way to work that in. As far as how online activities are impacting kids, we've seen some data come in to put some numbers behind the problem. We know that on-device research studied tens of thousands of young people in actually 6 different countries and found that among Americans 16 to 34, only 30% were worried that anything they did or posted or wrote online could impact them in any negative way. So 70% didn't think this mattered, but amazingly, among the younger cohort, 16 to 24, 8% of Americans had already experienced the loss of a job or rejection from a job they were applying for because of something they did on social media. Among the group 25 to 34, that figure was 7%. And these are self-reported, so we wonder if these numbers might actually be a little bit higher.
Absolutely, because there's many cases where an employer rejects an applicant because of something they found on social media and certainly doesn't broadcast it to the applicant. You just don't hear back, or you hear, well, the position was filled. But they found you in a beer hat on your Facebook and said, okay, this isn't someone we want.
Yeah, absolutely, and we've seen this, we've talked to people, so anecdotally we can absolutely back that up because we've talked to a lot of employers that see that persona from someone on their online profile and just pass. So yeah, the person, as Ed said, the person would never know.
And virtually all employers now check for your social media profiles. What's public? Virtually all of them will Google you.
Yes, absolutely. And what's happening in some parts of the country is that, well, I will say Glendale, let me start with Glendale, California, because we don't know if this is going to spread much more beyond that. But this is now the second school year, the second academic year, in which this school district, a very large school district in California, has hired an outside firm to monitor students' postings online. And the justification for this, we often get asked, what's the reason? Why are they saying, why does the school district think this is okay? And it has to do with suicide. So they're looking for certain warnings, certain triggers, certain things that they might look to do, conduct interventions after seeing. But the reality is a lot of other things get swept up in this. So, and the things that can impact students, say, in the college admissions world or in the job search, it could be drug and alcohol references, as Ed alluded to earlier. It could also be even just things like excessive profanity or things that look like bullying. This is something we're going to monitor to see where does this go from there. We haven't seen any districts actually anywhere near here, and certainly none that we've seen in New England that have gone to this step of hiring firms to monitor their behavior online. Okay, so specific online threats. The first one, the big one we're going to talk about is cyberbullying, something you've all heard of and something that you all know is a very hot button topic in schools. Now, one thing we want to say, there's often a perception that cyberbullying seems a lot like, I'll call it analog bullying or real-world bullying, in the sense of there's a role of a victim and a bully, and it's very clear who's who. In cyberbullying, something that research supports and something we've also found is that the roles often change. So someone who's a victim one day, or in one situation, could be a bully the next day, or in a different situation. And so it's very important as adults that we try to gather as much information before we jump into these situations. So in other words, try to get context. Don't just take a single screen capture of one thing that one person wrote and think you understand a situation entirely, because in many cases you don't, and you can actually sometimes make things worse. Inevitably, we get the questions about, come on, weren't kids always bullied? Why can't kids just toughen up? This cyberbullying stuff is overdone. And we think it's a wrong-headed way to think. There's a lot of fundamental differences between cyberbullying and real-world bullying. One of them is, cyberbullying is 24/7. Cyberbullying is hard to, I mean, this is this bullet point here about the fact that it's hard to escape a cyberbully, whereas in a real-world bully situation where someone's going to try to find you at a certain point in the day, knock you over, take your lunch money, they have to find you, and there's only a limited window of time often when they can actually do that. so that it kind of covers both of those first two bullets about the fact that it's everywhere and it's all the time. It's also public. So someone calling you a name, someone pushing you down on a playground, that sometimes only happens in front of a couple people, or it might not even happen in front of anyone else. But cyberbullying, when it's happening on someone's Instagram account or their Facebook wall or their Twitter feed, that's actually being put out in front of anyone who's able to look. And in most of those cases, that really means anyone. It also changes the impact on adults. So with adults, we can sort of hear, well, someone said this, someone said that, well, he said this, she said that. We're not going to take sides. We don't know what really happened. But as adults, when those words are written, we no longer have the choice to simply say, well, we don't know what really happened, because we have to. We can't ignore it, and so often it sort of puts us in a position to need to sometimes step in and actually address these issues in a way that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
And I'd like to say also that another difference is that cyberbullying is more accessible. In the past, bullies were generally people that were bigger than you. Cyberbullies can be anyone because they're sitting there in their own homes with a false sense of safety. So even the cyberbully can be putting him or herself at risk.
So, and then when, in these situations where you hear about a situation maybe involving your child, what can you do? And what you want to do is start by taking as many screen captures as possible. So you can, and with most software programs, that's just simply a print screen command. If it's something happening on an iPhone, we can talk to you guys after the program. If you've never taken a screen capture with it, we'll walk you through how to do that, and it's really just two buttons you're going to hit and release simultaneously. But the more you can gather, the better, and we want to ask you do that first, because if you sort of intervene too quickly, a lot of the posts may get, or if you sort of raise the flag without having actually documented what was done or what was said, the post may get deleted before you can actually take the action that you want to take. Also, when a lot of cyberbullying happens on social media sites, the social media sites are very proactive about how they'll respond to complaints, because they don't